This evening's Dharma talk is titled Just Observe Number 2. I already gave this talk. I'm going to keep giving it until everybody gets it. Don't add, just observe. Whatever shows up, just that. Whatever comes out of your reaction, whatever comes out of other action, whatever is happening, please. I have to beg you? No, I'm not going to beg you. Just observe. It's possible to do that. It's possible to just, the fancy word I don't use very much is possible to just witness what's happening. Whatever is happening negative, whatever is happening positive, whatever is happening neutral, just observe. No comment. Please. There I go begging you again. Why do I say that? I say that because the way in which you, me, that's all I know about it because I do it, something arises and we have little comments on it. Something else comes up and then we have little comments about that. It starts to go away and we comment. It starts to come forward, we comment. Elaborate. We flesh it out so we actually think we're here. We actually think that we have a solid being who's here, who has an existence. This is incorrect. Whatever arises in your mind, outside of your mind, a tractor coming down the road, adding on to who's doing that, why is there a tractor there? Don't do it. You don't need to do that. You don't need to have opinions on anything. They're useless. Other than in the hands of ego, then there's supports to keep that ego, that self-centeredness that is so distasteful when we see it in someone else. But when we see it in ourselves, it's like, I'm doing pretty good. I'm okay. Well, at least I'm not as self-centered as that guy. Isn't it interesting, isn't it, how we can notice how completely in love with themselves other people are? How self-centered they are, and how just... Now, this doesn't mean that when you see something, if something comes up spontaneously as a reaction, that you should try to squelch that. That's actually adding. Don't do it. Be genuine. Be who you are. Have the neurosis that comes up spontaneously, but don't do anything extra. Don't try to get rid of it by actually pushing, judging, evaluating it, and also don't try to get rid of it or modify it or control it by explaining why it's there, who did it, and why it's happening, and how it should be shut off, or shouldn't be there. For those of you who have studied the Great Perfection, Dzogchen, this is what this is addressing. It is helping all of us who are caught in Indra's net, who are caught in the net of this and that, and confusion and warfare and winning and losing, the 8 worldly dharmas. Those of you who are caught in that, this is a way to practice where you can begin to penetrate reality and see what it fundamentally is. Yourself, you can do it. Don't believe a word I say. Don't believe a word anybody says. Start now. Don't add, don't subtract, don't divide. Do nothing with whatever is arising other than to observe it. And when something does arise, you may also be observing how the knee-jerk kind of reaction is to add on to it. It's good, it's bad, it's this, it's that, it shouldn't be, it should be. It's because of this, because of that. Blah, blah, blah. So whatever arises probably is going to trigger something in your, this whole schema we call a human being. It's probably going to trigger some area, probably right under your armpit, that you've not investigated. If you've investigated, if you know who you are, you can't be triggered. You can be triggered, but you won't do anything with it. You won't try to stop it. You won't try to advance it. You can get intensely angry and do nothing, and no one will even know. But if people know you're angry, unless you're me, of course, I get to do whatever I want. If people know, people can read that kind of display of irritation, frustration about anything that's arising. You're just showing them the way you have not really trained your mind. You have not really found out who you are. You have not really looked deeply into who you are. Be genuine. How can you be genuine? Stop fighting with yourself by blaming others. Whatever arises here is your emotion. Nobody's pouring a bucket of emotion into you. If you have intense feelings about anything, I don't care if someone's sticking a knife in you. It's your nerve endings. You actually abandon reality by blaming someone, even when they're a criminal. Don't do it. Leave that up to the mundane path, where they lock people up for doing things. Leave that up to the craziness in society. They eat worldly dharmas, where they're still fighting with what they think is real and unreal. A spiritual path, real and unreal, is somewhat beside the point. Because it is, as Nagarjuna said, it's both and neither. Not this, not that. Not this, not that, not both, and not neither. If you're in this room, if you're looking at this screen as this old person talks, that means you probably are in a position to be able to understand this. It's not even about meditation. If you understand what this is, you don't have to meditate. Why do we meditate? So that we can bring the attention down to see this still silent point of awareness. If you think something needs to be fixed, you're incorrect. As I said, even someone running a knife into you, I'm not saying it doesn't hurt, and I'm not saying the person didn't do that, but the fundamental nature of that is not separate. You cannot have a murderer without a victim. You might say, what does that mean? Or you might not. And why does that look so obviously, is that structured in such a way that we immediately side with the victim? Usually. It's because we don't see deeply into it. And that means we haven't seen deeply into this. See deeply into this, and you won't fight with anything anymore. You also won't miss anything. When I say we won't miss anything, I'm not saying we won't forget things or bump into a wall or mistake a window for a door and try to go out the window. You might, especially if you're old. Remember that one time? That never happened. We're going to ignore that. So every time a negative feeling arises in you or anyone in here, I'm going to point to every single one of you. Anytime you have any negativity at all, Dharma gate. It's not that they caused that and they've got to stop doing that so I won't feel this way. This is sandbox level. Children blaming. He hit me. The causes and conditions that arise as the next emotion you have are unfathomable. You cannot trace them. So please don't necessarily go to the most recent apparent trigger. If you're going to do that, you might as well go further back. You might as well go back to the 3 lifetimes before that trigger showed up. Causes and conditions are unfathomable. That's why it's a trap. That's why the whole world is trying to what? Solve problems. That's why no matter how erudite or intelligent or no matter what wonderful peacemaker, Mahatma Gandhi, pick one, pick any. If there's no mind training, you've got problems. Maybe a very high level of problem, but you've got problems unless someone has fundamentally seen what this is. If you haven't fundamentally seen what this is, you will automatically judge everything. You'll judge yourself, you'll judge others, and you'll try to correct people. And you'll operate out of what? What are the two? The bandits of hope and fear. These are the little gremlins that are lying in wait to attack your wisdom mind. Hope for something better and fear that it's going to get worse. So just observe. Whatever is happening, whatever emotion is coming, whatever negative, positive, neutral, whatever is happening, even though you see the trigger of it, rather than ignore what is arising, please don't ignore what's arising. Look at what's arising. Look at the leading edge of everything. That's where you need to look. Don't go back 3.5, 4 feet and find out who caused that. Knock it off. Or don't. Go do something else. Or continue to blame your world for how you feel. Yes?
What's anger that arises that's not a response to a trigger?
All passion, aggression, and ignorance they're all are connected. There's relative truth. They're all connected to triggers in some form. Go deeper. I always sense, especially with you, I sense there's some other thing that you never tell me about that's causing this question to arise. Let's go there. What is it?
I think the words you talk about wrongjung or something that doesn't
Self-existent.
Self-existent. What's anger that's self-existent?
There's no one angry. It won't even feel like anger. No one will know you're angry.
Is there still a trigger?
Won't matter. The only way you can have a trigger if things are separate. When I say it doesn't matter, it doesn't mean there isn't something operating there, but it's not separate. There are no separate beings anywhere. There's a separating that happens out of hoping for something better and fear of something worse. Does it seem like I'm angry?
Motivated.
Motivated? Like Tony Robbins? What?
You just said with him that it won't feel like anger.
I did?
Yes.
I lied. With you it will. Okay, ask your question, please.
What would it feel like? Not just anger, but any emotion.
It would, and this is not something you can try to do. What you need to try to do is to see what's moving. See, just observe, without tamping it down, without fluffing it up, and without shutting or turning away from it. See what it is. What was the question?
The question that I just asked.
Sure. Are you drawing a picture of me?
If I am, it's not a good one.
No, I know you're taking notes. Just trying to just get over my anger. It's so difficult. I get so mad. Let's see. Let's see. Him? Okay.
I was just wondering if you could say something more about Have you seen who you are? People know that you're angry.
Well, I'm not saying that you wouldn't occasionally get mad or irritated and people would see that you're mad or irritated, but generally and specifically, if you're functioning with your awareness in such a way that you're not adding, subtracting, dividing, you're doing nothing, you're not fiddling or meddling with anything, your mind or anyone else's mind, then anger can come and go and not leave an imprint. If you're identified with the sky, that openness, then the cloud can't leave any tracks.
For you, is there a way you would distinguish when you're angry and it does not show up, and when you're angry and it does show up?
I'm a Dharma teacher, so anything can show up over here. I just spent 30-some years looking at this. Now it's time to tell people about it. Keep coming.
Does that anger ever show up when there's nobody around to teach?
Could. Mine.
Is there any way to talk about what was changed? Like if I'm having an expression of anger, there's usually a great deal of explanation around it.
No.
And when you're having an expression of anger, what is occurring, if anything?
Let's see if I can remember. When's the last time I was mad? You know?
When
Which time?
Shoshi took all the wall out of Karma House.
When Shoshi did what?
Took the wall out of Karma House when you didn't want him to.
Shoshi took the wall out of Karma House?
Like 2 years ago.
Well, I've been mad since then. How'd you know about that?
I was here.
You were scared?
Yes.
Oh, because of the what? Because you're afraid that you might do something like that? You might get mad at you? Another question on that same.
I was also wondering if anger could be replaced with any emotion, including positive emotions, if our expression of positivity is also a lack of understanding.
I think it's possible, but it's not going to be possible unless we first allow ourselves to be angry. When I say allow, I don't know how, but that means don't look for why you're angry. It's just anger. And this is where the word rangjung or self-existing, it's just self-existing. There isn't anyone that's angry behind it, no person. So I can get horribly mad right now, and you'd think I was mad. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to scare anybody. Some of you have seen me do that. I'm doing it to show off because I like to show people how really, really enlightened I am. Yes?
When intense emotions come up and I look at them, why do they dissolve so quickly? Why do they like disappear and I can't find them, but then they reappear?
If you're just looking at them, not doing anything, they get their energy out of opposition or agreement or ignorance, the three poisons. That's how they get their substantiality or their apparent solidity. So if you're just looking at the anger, it just starts to there's no expectation that it will. If you have expectations that it will, I'm just looking at it so it will dissolve, then it probably will hang around for a while. But if it tends to just dissolve and
Well, like it arises and I'm aware of it and I'm looking at it and I'm looking at the way I point to other things, and then it kind of slips away.
sounds good to me. Then it comes back. Well, that's good.
It
Bad.
just seems like doing it over and over and over. Is that a practice in awareness?
Sounds like it. At some point, you won't mind whether it's there or not, because there's no indictment of there's no self-centeredness as being somehow blamed or, oh my gosh, here I go again. How many times have we said that to ourselves? Here I go again. Or there he goes again, or there they go again.
is there any sense of taking responsibility for things that arise?
So taking responsibility, might be better to say that by just observe what happens. If there's any need to have the ability to respond, then if it's coming out of awareness, then that response will be appropriate. It won't be something you figure out or decide on based on success and failure or on correct or incorrect. It'll be like, you won't know where it's even coming from. It won't feel like there's any particular intention around it. On the other hand, we have precepts that all have a lot of intention in them, so we need to train ourselves using the precepts, so to help us, give us some kind of a structure, but they're not to be obeyed. Precepts are to be observed, not obeyed. Go ahead.
Is it any different to say, here it comes again, rather than pointing at himself, or here I go, or they go?
Yeah, here, if you see anger rising or something like that, and if you make any comment, you've just covered it up. You've modified what's arising. And it's a subtle way of being in control of it. It isn't, you can't completely, if you could stop it, you would. You would just go, nope, not doing it. It's called ignorance. Where's the lid? That's going to come up. That will get triggered eventually. But to say, here I go again, or here it comes again, extra, don't do that. And how do you work with that? How do you not do that? You see the way you do it without doing anything with it. It's always about the awareness of it, rather than you're aware of it and now you're going to stop making that comment. That's why it's so difficult, so subtle, is because it is the self-centeredness is extremely subtle, sneaky, and it masquerades as enlightenment. It masquerades as sanity. It's just always it's so facile with everything that it can. I mean, it's the very nature of consciousness masquerading as a self. So consciousness doesn't belong to anybody. There's no parts to it, and yet it can completely show up as parts. Look at them. It's an astonishing situation we find ourselves in. We're not even human beings. We're not human beings, but we're not just this. There isn't anything that we are not. We're consciousness, showing up as living beings. We've been doing this since beginningless time. And here we are again. Questions are good if you have them. David?
If we put a lid on it, is there a lid to take off again?
I think the sitting practice of meditation kind of starts to dissolve those. So we sit and hold still and practice watching what's moving. You might be watching your breath, you might be watching thought patterns come and go, you might be going through something that happened 5 years ago, but you're watching what's moving. You might actually leave the room and come back. Sometimes the way I was taught, the idea was to try to stay in the room. And it only took me 3 or 4 decades to realize this is how I see this, is to be aware when you leave the room, not to stay in the room. That's manipulation, and that's trying to get a healthy meditator who knows stuff and is aware, is always peaceful, not impressed. Yes?
Is it important to look at the lid?
Well, if you're going to use that metaphor, then I would say, yeah, that might be what you're looking at when you're looking at the wall. You're sitting, you're looking, as I sometimes say, what you're looking for, you're looking at. It doesn't mean you're, in one sense, it doesn't mean that the lid is it. It's seeing the way that what you're covering up is behind it, so to speak. But then once you actually see it, you realize that not only is that it, but the lid is it. There isn't anything separate. Sometimes it takes a few little footsteps this way and that way before we're ready to really see that there isn't anything that is separate. Even the knife in the gut by the murderer and the victim, not separate. It's just a misunderstanding of the nature of things. One that thinks there's somebody over here and thinks there's somebody over here. Lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. This is the way it appears. Don't believe a word I say. I don't believe it, but I don't look away from it. Yes, sir.
Is there a difference in the observation of the leading edge and our adding to it?
If you're watching the leading edge, to use that same metaphor, if you're watching it, you won't know what it is. If you know what it is, then you've already, maybe it hasn't formed in words, but you're already naming it. You're adding, and the three natures tradition, looking at those, that particular model of how the mind functions in terms of delusion is a part culprit of the imputed nature. You're imputing something onto it because the complete rawness of what that is threatening to the self-centeredness, because if that's not separate, then the self-centeredness is gone, and it needs to, as Trungpa Rinpoche said, one of the best descriptions of ego is a paranoid insurance policy. It's something you've signed on for somewhere, that it's paranoia about being overtaken, about being controlled, like we talked about earlier. Yes?
Does the leading edge always move?
Until it doesn't. At some point, there's no edge. There's nothing leading. You're not separated from anything anymore. So there won't be anything to do. You'll just be wherever you're at. You'll be there. As long as there's eyes, nose, tongue, body, mind, thinking, that you'll just. But it won't function to support a self. So therefore, you wouldn't even. I'm not saying you wouldn't run away from somebody who's going to stab you, but you would have some idea of understanding of what that's about as you made tracks. So you wouldn't stay there and just out of some kind of idealism. Well, we're all one, so kill me. I'm not going there with it. We still function in a relative situation and an absolute situation at the same time. Those are, when we say not separate, everything. You can't find a separate thing anywhere. It's separated all over the place, and it's very, very deceptive and very magnetizing. We actually think there's right and wrong. What there is there's confusion and there's fear. And somebody who's really, really fearful, they're really fearful, they'll cover that over with their ideas, their opinions, their judgments. They don't even know they're afraid when they kill somebody or when they control thousands, millions of people. They don't even know they're afraid because it's so sealed over with their ideology or their belief or their opinion. All useless, useless wardrobe of ego. I mean, useless to ego, but harmful to others. Yes?
Can our adding be something we don't know?
Yeah, we don't know that we're doing it, but this is why the sitting practice of meditation is so helpful to actually beginning to look deeper into the causes and conditions that arise as our mind, our ideas, our thoughts, our opinions, who we are, what our world is, what we're here for, all of that, to look deeper into that. So sitting down, holding still, and stretching, training, sharpening the mind to see more clearly, so that when we get up off the cushion, probably not much is going to happen on the cushion, except maybe boredom. I'm not saying you won't have some fancy experiences of disembodying or thinking you're bilocation, all kinds of things can go on. Yes.
Shane from Texas asks, how should I be genuine with my neurosis if it's harmful to another or causes suffering?
Yeah, well, it would depend on the situation. I know what you're saying. It seems to be necessary to get that into view somehow, and sitting down and meditating is the way to do that. I don't know what extreme is going on there. Maybe you should stay away from those people if you're hurting them. I don't know. That's, if you're actually with somebody that you're harming in some way, then find some way to put more space there. One of the ways you can put more space there is say, oh, time to sit. Go sit. Or you can even say it more, whoopsie, time to sit. That's a good word to use. Then they think you're going somewhere to do something that's, you know, all about you. And they'll project onto you that you're self-centered and you're going to go indulge yourself in meditation. Further question about that, Shane, if you have it. Sometimes that's called a relationship.
Does our addition always cover up the leading edge?
Probably. You know, it's there's all kinds of variables in that. I'm using metaphors to try to point to something that I don't even know how to talk about. It's hard to see this and know how to talk about it. I've been looking at it for a while, and only recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been talking about it and stumbling a lot. It's hard to know how to talk about something like this. That's why I tell people, don't teach unless you have to. I'm not saying you can't say the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 12 Links. You can't describe that or just talk to somebody about how that all works. Of course you can. Don't point out the nature of reality out of concepts about it. Just because you can. Junshu?
Earlier you said it's possible to just witness what's happening without adding,
Yes.
subtracting and such. Does that mean that you are able to do that, have done that?
Yeah, you're able to do that. You're doing it right now.
Does that happen simultaneously with the adding and subtracting?
It can, because the beginning of that is just to see that you're adding and subtracting without interfering with it, which would be more adding and subtracting. So you have to see the first, that's why Trungpa Rinpoche, his way of teaching this, it literally took me years to understand what he was talking about. I thought about it a lot. First thought, best thought. Very first thing that comes up, I want to add anything to it. That's bad enough. Go ahead.
Is even labeling it first thought adding?
Yes.
How do we just witness?
Sit a lot. The best place, as far as I know, I'm not saying there isn't another place or another way, is to sit down and hold still with all of the senses open and watch what keeps not being still. When you hold the body very still, your diaphragm moves, and I'm sitting, so I notice if there's any little movements, I'll notice that, and I'll notice my own thought level, which wasn't much happening there. A little bit of movement there. It was actually, I'm looking at, on the screen, I'm looking at the, noticing that the negative shape inside my thumbs, so that's what was showing up when I started to do that. And thinking, that's backwards. Like the Buddha, it's backwards. Further questions? I promise not to yell at you.
When does our witnessing become doing?
Well, it's doing. You need to do it. You need to practice. So it's a doing, coming down, sitting down, holding still, doing this. So it's, when you're witnessing, you're actually endeavoring to bring your awareness to whatever is moving. So you're sitting, and what if thoughts arise? I'm sure you've noticed it's very difficult to even see what a thought is. We know we have them, but we don't know. I remember early on, way back when I started reading about this back in the late 60s, or there was a book, I can't remember who it was by, but anyway, on meditation. I don't think it was a Buddhist, but they said something about watching where thoughts arise and what they look like, and then watch them when they go. I've never been able to see the front and the back of a thought. Can you? But people talk about that. Some teachers do. I can't really find any dynamic that you could call dimensional to it. Doesn't seem to have a dimension. It's like in that whole area, there doesn't seem to be anything such as time or space. That's something we impute. We give it space. We give it time, abstractly. Michelle?
How can we notice or tell a difference between perceiving and our projections?
I think just by practice and simplifying, holding very still, find everything that's moving and hold it still without being at war. So you're going to be very still and then look at the perception. I mean, be in the perception of whatever's happening and notice if anything gets tagged onto it. Notice if something is happening, you're seeing something, and you, like I was describing about watching the oval inside my thumb and first fingers, looking at that, and then something came up about that shape. So it's not about getting rid of that, it's about just being aware of that. So when things do get very difficult, you actually can see that it doesn't really work. It isn't in line with the way reality is to blame anybody for anything. It's so, including this person, there isn't anyone here to blame. There's no one out there. There's an apparent other and an apparent self, but that's as far as it goes. They're unreal. More, Michelle? We have some time if there's further questions. Yokoro.
Can we experience just passion, aggression, and ignorance without an object?
It looks like we can. Looks like that's a possibility. I mean, there tends to be, if it's supported by being upset with someone or something, but sometimes those kinds of things tend to show up without any apparent otherness to them. So, like feeling depressed. We give it the name depressed. Might have a dozen people that all say I'm depressed, but what's actually happening with each person might be quite a bit different than if they were to compare notes. Might be different things. Some people's depression is so intense they just want to end their life. They think that's going to get rid of it. Not saying it won't, but probably not. So sometimes you probably notice that sometimes you feel really good. There's no real reason, so immediately look for, well, it must be because I'm drinking more water. Well, maybe it's because I'm fasting. Or maybe it's because we can go on rather than just whatever's happening is just, it's like blaming the weather for something. Yes.
How can we work with the self being unreal or incorrect without getting caught up in a duality?
The duality is also not two. Duality is just makeshift. It's just something we do in order to explain things. So you don't have to get rid of duality. So being caught up in a duality would be actually thinking there's a right and wrong, or there's this and then there's that, and that this can be separated from that, rather than seeing they're two parts of the thing. So like the old yang and yin symbol, we're all familiar with that, the black and white, showing the unity of plus and minus. The I Ching talks about that quite a bit. More? Junshu?
In response to one of my earlier questions, you said, we're always just witnessing? Why can't we see that?
I think it's that we want something else. We're not satisfied with whatever is happening, and we want something more, we want something less, we want something different. It's the basic teaching of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. Life is discontent or dissatisfaction, and then that experiencing that supports that dualistic approach to things of it is and it isn't, plus and minus. And all around us we're surrounded by polarities everywhere, even night and day, inside, outside, life and death. Go ahead.
Does just witnessing have a particular feeling or texture to it?
You could feel kind of just like helpless or not much happening. Chunk Rinpoche talked about two different kinds of boredom. I thought that's a helpful metaphor. He uses hot boredom, or the anxiousness of sitting and or being impatient, wanting something else. And the cool boredom is you're bored, but you kind of you can almost say you kind of enjoy that. There's something that's tranquil, not tranquilized, but something is relaxed about boredom that doesn't really need something else. It's kind of like being in the dentist office, not really being impatient about them coming out.
A different question. If irritation comes up in response to somebody doing something, if it's our irritation, how can we have a conversation with that person without making them wrong or blaming them?
I think the way you're saying that, it means that you understand that it might be good to talk to them about it, but also that if you're seething, it might be good to deal with the seething. I mean, take responsibility, to use that same idea, taking or be, what do they say? Own it. Your emotions are your emotions, and so you might wait until those settle down a little bit, and then give it a little bit of space, and then maybe. And in our situation here, if you're a temple resident of this monastery, then what's recommended is that you do it as formally as possible, and that gives a good container to so there's some communication, some cooperation, some collaboration. That person may be able to actually help you with that. So you would sit down face to face. You might even bow, have a formal interaction about something. You could. Or it might be just something where once you've settled down, you could say, you know what, when you said you were going to do such and such, you didn't do it. It just was difficult for me because then I had to pick up the slack there. I'd like you to try to be more responsible for taking care of your part of the agreement. If somebody's agreed to do something and then they don't do it, and then you might find out, you might find out they have an explanation of why that didn't happen. That when you hear it, well, that's totally reasonable. I can see where. So sometimes just taking the volume down a little bit just by waiting a little while, rather than immediately. Because if you jump right into it, there are going to be bodies everywhere. You get really upset with. We all know, what it's like if you have intense feelings. But isn't there? The ego will say, I need to say something now, I'm feeling bad. Because you know that if you wait, it's going to die out and die out and die out. Pretty soon it's like, you don't want to let them off the hook, You want them to pay. I'm not saying you all feel that, I'm just saying I feel that way. That's how I'm able to talk about it. So, more about that?
For me, it seems that there's a lot of discursiveness around the irritation, so it'll come up and I'll think, well, I have to say something now so that I don't let it build into something else, or there'll be embarrassment about the irritation itself, that it's
So what's your question?
super out of whack. is it, if there's an inkling that it might be helpful to talk about, is it still better to wait?
It's a difficult one to, I mean, it's a good question, but it's a difficult for me to respond to that based on conjecture and a vagueness. You know, it's so situational that might be because of your interaction with that person, which it sounds like that's what you're talking about, that might be the very best time to do it. So when we're saying best, worst, a good time, bad time, kind of good, not really good, but really bad, but not that bad, you know, we can take ourselves apart trying to figure it out. So, and at the same time, we don't necessarily want to be impulsive, but yet we want to be spontaneous. So, you know, impulse, spontaneity. What is impulse? Impulse is coming out of hope and fear. Action out of, you know, hope that you can make things better, or fear that things are going to get worse, or and then spontaneity could happen right away, but it's coming out of seeing a big, as they say, big picture, really understanding that you can actually function in such a way that may be about pointing out some kind of a problem or error or misunderstanding or something. It might be the time to do it right away. So when there's a lot of anger there, it's pretty hard to, you know, when there's some kind of blaming coming out. Even I'm not making this up. In the teachings it says, and you've all heard this quoted, read about it. All dharmas are without blame. This is a way of describing 12 nidanas, the 12 links in the chain of existence. Everything is dependently arisen. Nothing arises and comes. It has its own svabhava, its own self nature.
In that situation, I think you said something like that might be the best time to say something?
Could be.
Is it possible to miss that opportunity?
Very possible. If there's a genuine heartbeat going on, I don't know how else to say it. If there's a genuine feeling of wanting to be fair and be helpful to someone, not just about getting it off your chest, so to speak, but if there's some genuineness in that, then even though there might be some anger or some irritation there, it might not be too bad to do it at that time. If one is doing a lot of sitting practice, those of you who sit a lot, we have people in here who sit a great deal, not just an hour or two a day, a lot more than that. And if somebody is spending a lot of time on the cushion, those of you who sit a lot can attest to this, that you may not think of yourself as having attained enlightenment, but there's a lot more clarity around it. If you're already giving a lot of working with your own mind in an open and expansive way, then that tends to carry over. Even though there can be difficult feelings and emotions can be triggered, still there's an openness that does not show up in words of like, I'm so open. Or if you say, well, I'm just trying to be open. This is probably fishy. But you could come out of some kind of genuineness about it, and it could happen immediately and could be spontaneous and not impulsive. More? Question? Yes.
Is the impulse always felt in the gut?
You've noticed that, huh? The gut. I think it's a combination of the gut and the paranoia and the wanting to defend and like we talked about, not wanting to be controlled by anybody or anything, not wanting anything to control you. And so I'm just using metaphors, you know, the heart, the mind, the paranoia here, and the hope and fear down here, and it looks like, in order to be able to talk about it with this heart, not the physical heart itself, but something about this central area, sometimes called the heart chakra, Something about this area seems to be, even Ramana Maharshi, the sage of the early part of the last century, the Indian awakened person, is very specific about it. He said, 2 fingers to the right of center. That's where the heart is. So he actually pointed to it, not over here where the blood is being distributed. I would say I wouldn't believe that or disbelieve it or ignore it. Yes.
You were talking to Junshu about a container, especially in a situation where you get 2 residents and you set up kind of containers.
Yes.
In our practice, the last few days we did setting up kind of a container for
We did.
beginning meditators. How does that take us into what, or does it take us to
That's what?
using a container in a difficult situation?
Well, that's meditation training, so people can talk to others about meditation and do it in a simple, straightforward way that doesn't meddle with the person's mind, actually allows them to train their mind rather than filling them with some kind of ideas about it. So that's a different situation than what we're talking about here, I would say. And all we're saying is if there's some kind of difficulty, misunderstanding between 2 people, probably not a bad idea to sit down, hold still. First, sometimes I say, look at each other in the eyes for, you don't have to look at your watch, but 30 seconds or a minute, and just reconnect with your basic energy connection. So just do that, and then you could bring up what you wanted to talk about. Say, I wanted to talk to you about this situation that happened 3 days ago, where I was upset about that, and I thought we should talk about it, and whatever that may be. And sometimes the other person will be totally surprised that there was even a problem. Or else they might say, yeah, I know, I was wondering if you were going to talk to me about that. And then they might say, I might apologize, I'm really sorry about that. Or any possible thing could happen. But it's a different situation than meeting somebody for the first time and sitting down and functioning as a meditation teacher. And the reason for setting up those practice interviews was not only so you can learn to teach meditation to someone in a very simple, straightforward way that doesn't interfere with them, with their life that's already difficult, but also so you could get an idea of what the other end of that feels like. And realize that you actually are talking about something you know nothing about. If I knew what I was talking about, I couldn't do this. And if you don't understand, you should ask questions. Guess you understand. All right. Yes.
How do you have verbal expression with something that you don't understand?
Pardon me?
How do you have verbal expression with something that you don't understand?
You mean if you're in a situation like that where you're talking to someone about it? Are you talking about me or you, or what are we talking about?
I guess either of those scenarios, but with you, how
Yeah.
are you able to?
I don't look for somebody who's understanding it. I don't have there's no one here who understands anything. I just said it a minute ago. The understanding belongs to nobody. I don't know where it comes from. It just shows up, and I'm not channeling anything. I'm not a spirit channeler or something like that. There just isn't a solid being. And there's no solid beings here with any of you. Realize it. It's a realization, not an experience. So when I say don't know, I'm just saying there's no one who knows anything. Yes. So go ahead.
How do we practice without understanding?
To see so it's difficult to talk too much about it without going into all the different ways that people are going to use the word not understanding and to look at you and talk to you about it. So to try to say it in such a way that it supports everyone, I would say that whatever is occurring, practicing, whether you're doing sitting meditation, whether you're in the kitchen buttering your toast, or dusting the snow off your windshield, whatever you're doing, there isn't anything else but that. And that doesn't mean you have to try to imagine that. All you have to do is just look at it, receive it, feel the snow, look at the snow, and without anything extra. What you do is you see that you don't understand anything. We don't know what snow is. We gave it a name. Now we don't know what it is. Look at things. If you can, you could actually take anything that you thought you understood, find out what the name of it is, and remove the name. What is it? What is that name covering up? So, toast, probably peanut butter, toast, and you know, it's just, you do that as if you've never done it before. If it's the only thing you're ever going to do in your life is peanut butter. Nothing leads to something else. Firewood does not become ash, as Dogen says, and gives people such a difficult time with because we try to go in and, you know, we can try to do it with physics. Well, it must be because of the molecules and because they aren't really changed, it's energy changing. It's not about that. It's actually, firewood is firewood. Peanut butter is peanut butter. The windshield is the windshield. It's just that. And the feeling of not understanding is terrifying to ego. And so therefore it won't quite just be present without somebody. Follow me a little bit? You can do this. Anyone can do this. If I can do this, you guys can do this. I don't even have a degree. I bet all of you do, though. And there's nothing wrong with having a degree or not having a degree. I'm just making a stupid joke. If I could have gotten it, that's probably the big mistake I made in my life. I didn't get a degree. I should have gotten a degree in botany. Yes.
So, using the windshield analogy,
Yes.
and the snow, earlier you were saying to just be aware that you've left the room and you don't have to just be right here. I'm wondering how that shows up in the windshield scenario.
Snow, windshield, movement.
But without that?
Without that, we have just enough awareness on it to know what we're doing, but we're in our head about getting in the car, about how warm the car is, about what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, about if we're going to be late for work, or else we're just complaining about the weather. I wish it was spring. Always wanting something else instead of being there. It's cold. I'm not saying you should take off all your clothes and be a Wim Hofer. Don't go the other direction so I can really feel like some people I know. So it's not like going another direction. It's just wherever it's at, it's always presenting itself. What you're looking for, you're looking at. You're looking right at, yes.
Does that terror ever change?
The terror may hang around, but eventually there's no one who's terrified. The terror may still be there, and it may be there, it may not, but you won't care whether it's there or not. There's no one who's terrified. There's just that energy. The causes and conditions that come from who knows where may show up in such a way that to the ego mind, they're a problem. But to one who has seen through this, seen through that, perception only. It's just this, always. There isn't anything extra. It's just the snow. It's just the peanut butter. What was that first example I gave? I keep wanting to go back to that one because I worry about it back there all by itself in the past.
The windshield?
No, it wasn't the windshield. There was the first one. What was the first one I told you?
Toast.
No, it was before then. Nobody wrote it down? Uh-oh. So it's just, you know, this simple way that it's often said is just be here now kind of thing. I don't teach that because that's something that ego tries to do. And it's not about trying to do that. It's just don't get in the way of it. When you see something, snow, you're brushing it, don't get in the way of what you're doing. It's just that. It's just the wall. You're just looking at the wall. This is a Suzuki Roshi taught Zen mind, beginner's mind. In the expert's mind, the possibilities are few because it's filled with its own knowledge and ideas and paraphernalia. But in the beginner's mind, the possibilities are endless because there's no expert there. There's no one there. This is why it feels so kind of scary to go to a job the first time, or to start doing something you've never done before. We want to get away from the beginner part. And so meditation practice offers you the possibility of sitting down and being nobody and knowing nothing. When do you start your job?
Monday.
Scary?
Oh.
Huh, okay. So I've taken a lot too much of your time already. Should we quit? Okay. Thank you.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit at the back of our red chant books. Once again, call your attention to the donation boxes in the hallway. Always ready to receive your generosity. Greatly appreciated.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi-hu, shi-son bu-sa mo-ko-sa. Directions, the three worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, its buildings, gardens, and all adjoining areas from any and all dark or negative energy. Remove and dissolve any negative energy or devices. Fill everything and everyone with light. Please shield and protect with light our teachers, monks, students, and all practitioners of the Dharma, our families and friends from negative forces and energy from now on. Help us to realize the truth of the Buddhist teachings.